Happy Father's Day, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ecclesiastes. We are still in the book of Ecclesiastes. We will be through a lot of the summer. We'll be starting a new series in August, actually. We're going to be moving, looking through the book of Jonah, and we'll be looking at the book of Jonah because we're going to be dealing with really the issue of evangelism. How in the world are we as the church, or basically, I should say, we as followers of Jesus? A lot of times when I use church, we think of, the paid guys. This isn't the paid guy conversation of evangelism. This is life. This is those who follow Jesus Christ. How do we do this? How do we engage in that? And so we'll be moving to that as we move forward. But today we're still in Ecclesiastes, the 8th chapter, and we're going to be weaving into Father's Day. Just like we did on Mother's Day, Father's Day, we're going to use the text out of that. Being a dad is not easy. I can remember the moment when found out we were going to have a baby. It was Beth had problems becoming pregnant, and she did. It was like, woohoo! It was exciting, and we were scared, and it was like, okay, now it's real. And then when they really come, it's really, really real, and it changes your world. It changes how you perceive the world, how you think, and even parenting as well. A mom or dad, it is something that's overwhelming. This role of husband, all of a sudden, this role of not only, that's an unusual word. When we become married, we become husband. It actually means house band, which means security. I don't know if you ever knew that before, but that word actually has the meaning of security, the one who wraps themselves around. And there's a sense of us guys, we're the protectors, right? I don't know where that comes from. We see ourselves as superheroes. We're the guardians. We're the ones that guard. We feel a sense of guarding the wife, and sometimes the wife guards us, of course, in all these scenarios. But is this reality of this responsibility? And it can be overwhelming. It's not easy to understand as we walk through this journey of life. And I believe Ecclesiastes 8 has some words of wisdom for us. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 9 in this text. And as we look at it, let's read it first, and then I'll explain how we're going to kind of transition from the arena of which Solomon is writing this. He's glimpsing into the throne room. He's looking at those who serve around the king. And he begins to speak some wisdom and dealing with wisdom in that scenario that I believe transfers over into parenting, into being mom or dad today as we look at this. So follow along, 8 all the way through verse 9. Who is like the wise man? Who knows the explanation of things? Wisdom brightens a man's face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his commands will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. And there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him. Since no man knows the future, who can tell him what is to come? No man has power over the wind to contain it. No one has power over the day of his death. No one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There's a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. It's quite an interesting text, and it is, and you look at it, there's a lot of nuances to it that I'm not going to dive into today. I'll just tell you right off the bat, there's just a lot of things, but he is looking at the one who is an attendant to the king, because it's a place of tension, and you almost get a sense of this. You get a sense of you're serving this king who has all authority to do whatever he wants to do with you, with the nation, with the people around him, whatever his heart's desire is. And Solomon knew that because he was king. He played the role as the king. He had that authority. Whatever his whim was could be carried out by those that were around him, even though whether it was wise to do or not wise to do, whether it was created harm or whether it created a blessing for the nation. He says you have this tension because as the one who serves the king, there is this pull, this tension of do I obey what the king wants me to do, even though I know this is like a bad idea? Not only that, but if you're serving the king, you always know in the court there are some who are for the king and some who are not for the king. Just look through the Old Testament and see how long some of those kings lasted before they were killed by the next person. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's always something happening in and around the king, in a sense that something could be, there's an enemy, and where do I stand as an individual, as a servant to the king? How do I maneuver through this king who is leading me one way or the other? And the reason I want us to move a little bit now in our minds from the king's court into my family court is because I believe there's some lessons we can learn from this same position. Because I believe we still have tension as dads. I think we have tension as moms. So I think we have tensions in our lives that we have to find wisdom to juggle with. How do we as parents fight the tension, or is that in our work world? When a boss wants you to do something you know you shouldn't do. When they want you to cut corners. When there's certain attitudes, when there's certain things that are occurring in that workplace that pull you in attention. They want you to work more hours with less pay, and yet they hold it over you, and you feel that pressure to do that, and yet you have kids, you have a wife, and how do I juggle this? There's a tension. How do I wisely maneuver through that? How do we wisely raise our kids when the world tells us we should raise our kids a different way? When the world says, no, you should let them do this, you should let them do that. No, this. How do we fight that tension as a dad? I think there's a lot of tension there in life of how we raise our children, studying what's right and what's wrong. Kids are looking to you. They look at the world, they look at you, and they, as parents, and you establish what is worthwhile, what is right, what is honorable. You establish as parents the time frame. How do we live our life? What's the value of life? Is how we spend our time. We communicate to our children what we value by what we choose to do. They understand that. They stack it up. We spend more time doing this. This has a higher value. We communicate that. There's a tension that is there that we have to learn to just discover and trust in God. What does God desire for us to live in the midst of this tension? And I think there's some just valuable points that I just kind of want to run through here in our mind, because we don't want to be unwise. Remember, there's two positions that we can take with God in the midst of this. Foolishness under the sun. And that foolishness, or that fool, as Solomon would say, would be someone who really ignores God's existence. God, I know you're there, but I'm going to kind of do my own thing over here. Solomon would say that's foolish living. That's a foolish mindset. Because there is accountability with that. The wise person, the wise heart, the wise soul understands that there is a God who is to be served. As a matter of fact, the psalmist writes in 111 that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. In other words, it begins with this, not only this leverage, but there's a respect, there's a fear of God that drives me, a love and a fear that's combined that allows me to say, I want to be obedient to you. I want to be submissive to you. I want to learn your ways, God. Because your ways are good. And Solomon knew even in his heart, even though the foolish person and the wise person still cannot escape death, he comes to the realization that living life wisely has this much more benefits because it's the one who lives in relationship with God. And so here's some lessons real quick that I think that we can pick up from. Here it is, the first one. Everyone has a boss, so learn how to submit. Everybody has a boss. You think, well, yeah, that's kind of obvious. But listen, that's an attitude often we don't think about living as in our life. But when you look at the text, he's telling them, listen, you made an oath to God. You made an oath to the king. You have a boss. Everybody in here has someone over top of them. And it's not an easy thing to do sometimes because we always think that we would be better bosses. I would be a much better boss than my boss. I could do this much better. I can do that much better. And it even goes beyond that. It even comes in the home. And when your kids hear you talking about your bosses, do you know what that does? It affects their concept of authority. It really does. It affects what they think. So when you say, hey, I told you to do that. Yeah, well, you talk about your boss that way. Why can't I talk about, you don't want to do what your boss wants you to do, so why should, and so we get into that. I can remember this question asked of Beth and I by our girls. I don't know how old they were, where it was, but I remember the look on their face and said, well, who tells you what to do? They were struggling with this. You tell us what to do all the time. Well, who's telling you what to do? They wanted to find out who was above us. I don't know if they want to kind of go around us and find out who that was so they could take their grief and complaints to that person. I don't know. But it was a question on their heart of who do you, and I think that as we grew up, you probably said this yourself at times. Don't tell me what to do. You remember those in your own heart? I'm 18. You can't tell me what to do anymore. You can't, and we get this, and it's our own fight, it's our own tension, but, there's an important value that we have to come to our own self and our own heart. There is authority over me. You're going to leave here, and you're going to probably try to go to speed limit. There's authority over you. There's a place to park and not to park. Most of you probably didn't park in the little blue spot with the wheelchair sign in it, right? You submitted to authority because there was something that told you, don't park here. Every state has its law. Every country has its law. Whether I'm in this country or we're in another country, it doesn't matter. And this is important to say, that Jesus himself modeled this. He modeled this. Because you got to remember, the people wanted Jesus to rise above and overthrow Rome, right? That wasn't why Jesus came. As a matter of fact, he looked at his disciples and said, you give to Caesar what's Caesar's and you give to God what's God's. What? What are you saying, Jesus? What he's saying is, you need to submit. Even though this is a non-God-honoring governmental system, you give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. There's a submission. And matter of fact, I appreciate, Austin, what you said, because that text that you read demonstrates Jesus' submission to his Father. He submitted. He had authority over him. He knew that. And he submitted even to the point of on the cross. He submitted in what he said. He submitted in what he does. He revealed that everything he said, the Father gave him to say. Everything he did, the Father told him to do. And it was this submission. Paul writes to the Ephesians, and he says for us to submit to one another. In other words, we've got to learn as people, as the body of Christ, to submit to one another. We don't like that. We want this, or we want to be over you. I've been here longer. You've been here shorter. We have this. No, we submit to one another out of love, out of reverence to Christ. Why? Because Christ is the head of the church, our authority. The answer to my daughter's question, who tells us what to do? It's a pretty easy answer. God. He's the one who really tells us what to do. As a matter of fact, in the book of Colossians here, Paul is writing about being obedient. He's actually writing to slaves and the servants, of course, because we kind of want to fight against that. But what he says here is obey your earthly masters in everything and do it. Not only when their eye is on you or to curry their favor or to gain their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It's the Lord Christ you are serving. So I have someone over me. God is over me. Christ is over me. And we live under that authority of God. That's an important life lesson to be giving to our kids. We all live under authority. But we are also people of authority. Moms, dads, we're people of authority. No matter where you're at, there's people of authority. And I appreciate this text in verse 9 and in other parts because this authority provides us opportunity to serve. Because we have different ways of dealing with this authority. It can go to our head. And is it a dad? I'm pretty sure I ordered my kids around pretty good, and they would ask me why, and I would answer them as any good father would answer them, because I told you so, that's why. Do you need any other reason? I am dad, I am the man, I am the authority. You go do what I told you to do, and or else. You always hope they never push on, or else what? Because then you got to make something up, because I said so, that's why you just do this. And so, but there is this sense in our mind that we can have an attitude that pushes us and that drives even our kids away or distance themselves from us or makes them fear us, in the sense that there is this sense of authority and lording it over our kids or even our wives, and those aren't healthy things. And I would say guys, our love language is really respect. A matter of fact, scriptures teach the wives doesn't use the word love your husbands. It's an interesting text. It says respect your husbands. The part is that we're wired that when you respect us, we translate that into love. And down in our heart, we want that respect from our kids. We want our kids to look up at you as dads, and moms same way. Look up as parents and go, man, I want to be like you. I want to be like dad. I want to be like mom. I want to be like that, and just this respect. You know, we desire that. And it's interesting. It doesn't come from this authority thrill. It comes from a different way, and Jesus teaches us that. A matter of fact, in Matthew chapter 20, Jesus is with his disciples, and the disciples are always actually fussing over this idea of this authority and this power that they wanted to be his disciples. They saw Jesus' popularity growing. They saw thousands upon thousands coming to follow Jesus, and they thought, yeah, and we're in the inner circle. We're with him. This is an ego boost. And that ego amongst them collided occasionally, especially when you had brothers that had private conversations with Jesus. As a matter of fact, the other text and the other gospels say that their mom got involved. Wouldn't you love to see that one? But the mom got involved and said, hey, Jesus, my two boys, they're like, I know you got 12, but my boys are the best. And they, when you go to glory, whatever that is, I don't even think they even knew what they were asking, but they knew at some point Jesus was going to be like this in this pinnacle moment of authority. And they asked, can we sit on your left and right hand side? And Jesus kind of responds back to them and says, you don't know what you're asking. You have no clue what you're asking. Well, that conversation got out to the rest of the 10. What do you mean you want to sit? I should be sitting next to him. You shouldn't be sitting. And so they start their fighting and bickering and going back and forth with each other. And finally, Jesus brings all 12 egos together. And he goes, listen, if you're going to follow me, it's going to be a little different. If you want to learn to lead, it's not the same as what you have seen all these years by the religious folks. It's not like the Pharisees. It's not like them. And he calls them in Matthew 20, verses 25 through 28. You can follow along or read on the screen. Jesus called them together and says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is saying, listen, we want to gain respect, then we don't do it by lording, we do it by serving. We do it by meeting need. We do it by coming alongside of. We do it by loving our kids in a way that we show them how to serve one another. We invite them into service in the home. We don't just command them to do things. We invite them to come along, help me do this, help me accomplish this, help mom do dishes. Why is it? Because we're family, and what family does is we serve one another. That's what family is. Families serve one another. It's a part of the terminology of family. It's not out of duty. It's out of our love for each other and respect for each other. We need to grow and produce that heart in our kids and invite them into those environments of life. All right, moving right along. Timing is everything. I think it's quite interesting in the text, and back here he talks about that, about the timing of the one who serves along the king, of obeying and knowing how the timing to approach certain things with the king. Because timing and judgment is everything. There's a process to deal with people. If you are, and if you're like me, I'm not a hot-headed guy. I don't blow up. I have occasionally in my life, and it's been very embarrassing. I will just say this: I got kicked out of a church softball league many years ago, and that is about as far from my nature as anything, and it's probably been the most embarrassing moment of my life. I cannot believe it's like an out-of-body experience. Like, where did that come from? But it was me. I'm not one of those who would say, oh, that's not me. No, I did it. It was me as it came out of my heart, as ugly as that moment was in my life. It was definitely timing, and I mean, it's just off. I gained nothing by blowing up and steaming and leaving and getting kicked out of a ball game. I gained nothing. Matter of fact, I lost a lot of things. And that's time because it wasn't good timing for what needed to be done. We all have this sense of wisdom and help to understand people, situations, and figure out what's the right time to say the right thing. You know what I'm talking about. I need to talk to my boss about something, but I don't know what the right time is. You know what I'm talking about? You've been there? I need to talk to so-and-so about something, but I don't know what the right time is. We think about it, but we never realize that Scriptures, it says it's something to pursue the Lord on. God, what's the right timing? How do we go about this? What do you want me to do? And we even have great Old Testament examples of it. You can see Joseph when he was already in power in Egypt and his brothers came. Wouldn't you think that the thing to do would just immediately go, hey, I'm your brother? But that's not what he does. By wisdom, he waits through this process until the right moment they reveal their heart, and all of a sudden then he reveals himself. We think about it in Nehemiah when he has to approach the king to see if he would be willing to send him back to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem. There was wisdom. What was the timing? Was this good timing or not? I think of Esther. I think of Esther especially, the timing of, first of all, approaching the king, but not only approaching the king without permission to approach the king. That was a faith step for her, but then to have a banquet. And then the first banquet, you think, okay, this is what she's going to tell him in the first banquet. And I always scratch my head and go, why doesn't she tell him the first banquet? Well, for some reason, through the leading of the Spirit, that we don't know through the text whatsoever, but she holds off and says, I need you to come back tomorrow night for another banquet. Why is it? I don't know, but there was timing involved here, and she knew it. And I think that we need to pursue that there's timing in our life and with our kids. There's times to approach people or not, and we need to demonstrate that and instruct them that. I know with my father, I won't go into the long story of that, but with my dad, man, you knew there was a process and timing to ask him to get something. It was not easy, and you had to watch it carefully, and you only asked once. If you asked twice, it was an automatic no. What you wanted to do is ask clearly, succinctly, and the worst answer you could get was, let me think about it. Anybody else have a dad like that? No, only me. I had a dad like that. Let me think about it. Now, this is why I say that, because Dad was usually out working something, doing something, woodworking, doing something in the yard, and so when you're asking him, he's usually doing something else. And so if he says, I'm going to think about it, it means he's going to forget about it in about 30 seconds when you walk away. And remember, the first rule I told you is you don't ask twice. So you're sitting there going, oh, you're stuck. You're immediately stuck because, like, do I approach him again? No, if I approach him again, it's twice and it's a no. So how, I remember, I have memories of the anxious moments of going, but Dad, I need to know now. My friends need to know, and just this moment of timing. And there were times I was told no and stomped away mad, and there were times I was said yes, and I don't think I ever said thanks. I just took off. So, but you know what I'm saying? There's this process. Other lessons that we learn from this text: keep your promises. Keep your promises. I know this sounds easy, but a lot of times we say a lot of words. We say a lot of things we're going to do, and we never do them. And it says, you made an oath. Now, this is an important part of the culture back then, more than in the Jewish culture. And oath giving was how they related to one another in business. Oath giving is how they related to one another as family. Oath giving is how they related even with themselves to God. And Jesus comes along in Matthew 5, and he begins to explain everything. This Sermon on the Mount, he makes these statements. You have heard this, but I tell you this. In other words, God was saying, let me get to the heart of this. And Jesus deals with this oath giving in Matthew 5:37. He simply says this: all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. In other words, he's basically saying, hey, watch what you say. Promise on what you're going to do. Don't try to make it sound better than what it really is. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Speak the truth. Keep your promises to your wife. Keep your promises to your kids. Fill it quickly. One day is a bad line. We'll do it one day. That's not a good thing to do. Not one day. Set a time, fulfill it, move on. And then the last thing is simply this, and I think this may be the one of the most vital lessons that we can learn from this text. And it's this. He starts it in verse 7 of chapter 8 and begins to reveal this sense. He says, since no man knows the future, who can tell him what is to come? No man has power over the wind to contain it, and so no one has power over the day of his death. I found that interesting because it reminded me of this. There's a lot of things in this world we're not in control of. And you think, this is really a point? Yeah, this is a point because there's some things in life we just can't control. And the reason I say that as a position of mom and dad, as parents or people of authority in lives, is because we want to think we are in control of everything. And we let our kids think that we're in control of everything. We live as if we really got it under control. And as part of our, for guys, as part of us guys, we want to pretend that we're calm, cool, and collected. And we can solve that, we can figure that. And I'm telling you right now, sorry guys, I may be breaking a guy code here just a little bit, but inside we're just as scared as everybody else. We don't know what we're doing half the time. I know you ladies respect us and already know it. You just don't say it. Thank you for guarding us on that area. But there's this sense of, in our own heart, this drive that there is this, we want to control certain things. We want to act like we are the superhero. I remember that Kylie, my youngest, used to call me Superman. I don't know why, because I don't, nothing looks like that. But she called me Superman, and I'd call her Lois Lane. And it was just this banter that we would have with one another, but it was in her image that you can do anything, Dad. You can solve any problem, Dad. You know the answers to anything, Dad. But see, as much as it like, yeah, I felt good about that because that's kind of cool. On the other hand, it's not true. It isn't. And so the reason I want to bring this point up is because I believe this text is reminding us as people that we've got to live in a way that reveals that we don't have our lives all together, but we are dependent on the one who does. Because the text says you don't know what happens tomorrow, but God does. You don't have any control over the weather, but God does. It reminds me of actually one of the VBS lessons of last week, because it really demonstrates this teaching, this truth. And we see that in Matthew 8, just this, the disciples are out at sea with Jesus, and the storm comes, and you're familiar with this story. If you're familiar with the Bible, familiar with Jesus, you're familiar with this story. But you see, everything about that story demonstrates this truth out of Ecclesiastes, because the storms came, the disciples began to do everything. They thought they were going to die. They thought God didn't care. They began to tie themselves in. They began to bail out the water. They did everything that they could within their power to control the situation they're in. But as far as they knew, this was the very end. And they're reacting and living in panic as if this was the very end. Whereas you have Jesus, which is the counter to that, which is found sleeping. Why? Because he did know what was coming next, and two, he knew he had authority over the wind and the water and the waves. He knew that. He lived in peace. The disciples lived in panic. It's a contrast. And so what we have here in this, for us, that we learn from is this: I need to live transparently in my life, that my coworkers, that my neighbors, that my children know that real life is spent dependent on the one who does control these things, and not acting like I am in control of all these things. That the wisdom of mom and dad doesn't come from mom and dad, but it comes from God's word. They need to see us in the word of God. Why do you read the Bible, mom and dad? Because I need to learn how to live life. And this is where I find out the answers to that. Why do you pray, mom and dad? Because I need to talk to God, because God is the one who gives me peace and calm. He's the one who answers. This is why I do these things. This is why I do them with my children. It's not just to show them how to talk with God. It's to teach them that mom and dad have to have God in order to move forward. And if we can teach that to the generation behind us, there's value in the Word of God. It's just not something to read, to be reading for some old literature. It's to know how to live life. I depend on it for truth. I depend on it to know what's right and wrong. I depend on it to know God. I depend to know on things that I don't know about. When I live that way, now I have lived in a way that my children and generation upon generation can retell the stories of God's grace and God's mercy, because they've seen us be dependent on God and His Word and in prayer. That's why I believe in all of life. This is really vital. And it goes beyond the family. Do your coworkers know how much you depend on God? Do your neighbors know how much you depend on God? And that's where we need to be vital and important to understand God's Word. So today, We need to be, we as men, as men and women need to live in a way that's transparent and teaches our dependence on God. This morning as we close, I just want to have a prayer for those that just are dads. It's not easy being a male or female. Both are difficult in our world today. Always have been, I think. But I just want to pray over our dads right now and over our men. Father,